The birth of life and the emergence of males originate from the concept of division in the five elements rigidness gene. As if an invisible blade splits the world into internal and external, one part of the universe contracts into the internal environment of life, governed by rules distinct from the external. Yet, it is not entirely isolated. It still relies on external materials and energy for metabolism to maintain internal stability. Thus, living beings develop a binary reflexive perception of external stimuli. What benefits them and what harms them, evolving into two opposing emotional tones, praise and condemnation, as if split by a blade. The emergence of males is another cut into the internal world, and perhaps not the last. The conflict between genes' infinite self-replication and limited resources leads to clustering and exclusionary behaviors. Each cut, each boundary, turns hostility toward outsiders into a means for insiders to maintain the boundary's existence. This may also be the root of male supremacist self-esteem derived from despising women. Humans' omnivorous habits in which the large size they achieve through as a result equip them to efficiently prey on smaller animals, ensuring relatively abundant energy in their ecological niche. This enables males to develop sizes and lifespans comparable to females. Building on this, males, by offloading the cost of reproduction onto females, gain even greater size. Thus, their animalistic tendencies grow unchecked, turning them into male supremacists. Male supremacists are like unruly children, extending their demands on mothers to all women, forcibly demanding from them selflessness, tolerance, diligence, and endurance surpassing even their own mothers. Diligence and forbearance are indispensable too. To this end, they have stripped women of everything: education, rights to resources, and even the permission to speak and be heard. Defying men in matters of reproduction is the gravest taboo, as the entire patriarchal world is built upon this premise. Here we understand the true meaning of the metaphor: the fish that dried up the sea. Macroscopically, the abundant resources like sea gave birth to life forms that used these resources to perpetuate their genetic code. Among them emerged life forms that degenerated reproductive functions, leading to a proliferation of species intertwined into a complex, stable ecosystem. This in turn gave rise to humans, beings capable of complex logical thought and adept at exploiting natural laws. To other life forms strictly bound by environmental constraints, humans represent a dimensional shift, like moving from water to land. Among humans, there also exist life forms that degenerate reproductive functions, reproducing by injecting their genetic templates into non-degenerate forms. These forms, leveraging this mechanism, grow larger than their female counterparts, thus capable of taking measures like controlling resource distribution and enforcing mating to trap non-degenerate forms in the water, using them as genetic proliferation tools, like running a fish farm. Water is essential for reproduction and maintaining life. For men, the degenerates on land, accessing water is easy, and their larger size demands more of it. But for women, the non-degenerates, especially pregnant ones, they rely on the water left by the degenerates to survive and reproduce. Less water means fewer resources and space, forcing them into conflict like betta fish, clamoring to leave the water and join the men on land. This is the origin of gender conflict. Thus, in masculinity, restricting women's rights to dominate them becomes a key tenet. Male supremacists on land spare no effort to preach women's inherent flaws. Women are greedy, materialistic, and their awakening is selfish. Women fight among themselves and lack unity. They press the undegenerates ones even more fiercely back into the water, forcing them to contribute to the very system that oppresses them. Men increasingly outnumber women on average. Water, the resource, becomes scarcer. And water is not only used by humans, the entire ecosystem depends on it. The more humans take, the more other life forms starve. To feed the growing population, forests are cleared for farmland, and lakes are filled for land. But populations inevitably exceed regional carrying capacity, and the environment deteriorates, harming humans in turn. Analogously, at the micro level, human males, unburdened by reproduction, save energy to grow larger. Furthermore, competing with other males for scarce reproductive resources further drives their size evolution. Where does the energy for this growth come from? From the mother's body. Thus, the females, selectively filtered out by males through this predatory pattern of male exploitation, modify their genes during reproduction, reducing energy supply to embryos, thus losing the ability for autonomous reproduction. In other words, females who did not evolve this mechanism were consumed by male paternal imprinted genes, failing to give birth or even dying. Throughout human evolution, males' degenerated reproductive functions used this degeneration to grow and move onto land, then stifled females' autonomous reproduction, cutting off one path for human continuation. This imbalance leads to reckless proliferation, disrupting population and ecological balance, truly the fish that dried up the sea, as in the three-body problem. It is a testament to dialectical materialism. The more a thing develops, the stronger its self-negating force becomes. Yet even if you explain this scientifically, male supremacist group remain unmoved. The world exists because of men and for men is the cornerstone of their worldview. They distort all disciplines into religions upholding masculinity, branding anything contrary as heresy. Theoretically, the humanities fall first given their lower barrier to entry, but the biological sciences were attacked earlier, with biased interpretations like the female immune system intercepts sperm to select more vigorous genes. But this is a male-centric explanation, portraying the immune system as a sperm vetting machine. Objectively, the immune system is carrying out programmed operations of clearing foreign entities. For most of evolutionary history, survival was hard. Easy pregnancy, especially with a less competitive offspring, wasted effort, failed to pass on genes, risking the mother's death. Only the most vigorous sperm breached the barrier, having a chance to bond with the egg, passing on their genes, a more accurate description. Evolution has no subjective direction. It is code that happens to run, like the Scyphopteron sea slugs that mate by shooting darts or the low IQ kakapo who can't fly. They survive by chance, labeled fit by observers. Another anthropocentric question: why humans don't have estrus? The answer we often hear is, human females have evolved the ability to be in heat at any time in order to obtain food from strong males. Is flawed. Comparing humans to seasonal breeders reveals the truth. Fundamentally, estrus manifests as rapid fluctuations in reproductive hormone levels within an organism during specific periods. This hormonal disrupts homeostatic balance, triggering physiological restlessness that compels mating behavior to alleviate distress. The causation becomes evident. Cyclic variations in survival-critical resources, food, water, thermal range, create disproportionate fitness advantages for offspring born during phenologically optimal windows. This seasonal selection pressure drives the evolutionary emergence of estrus-mediated reproductive synchronization. Let's take a closer look at the two conclusions which have been spread widely and still popular among people with obvious patriarchal tendencies. They all show a clear stance inclination. Women evolved for men, who shaped women's evolution by controlling resources, thus shaping human evolution. I saw the two conclusions respectively in a well-made documentary and in a hardcover book on humanities. What we witness here is the omnipresence of patriarchal cognitive frameworks, a hegemonic apparatus that has successfully co-opted the apparatuses of intellectual producing, from journalistic spheres to the academy, as if whispering to women, "You are as you are because of me. What will the cost be if you displease me?" What is deeply unsettling is the realization that humans, much like breeding animals, are selectively shaping their own kind. This undeniable fact suggests that the evolutionary trajectory of our species is bifurcating into two distinct paths, and this divergence has effectively solidified into a hierarchical framework, one that is now thoroughly entrenched within the very machinery of social operation, which contributing to approaching the evolutionary endgame when different social classes of humans exhibit distinctions like which bet we humans and dogs, in Lutzishin's Raising Mankind. In retrospect, this media and literature come from the West. It seems that Asians should not blindly worship white Western civilization. It is precisely because the West entered industrial civilization earlier, thus dominate the world earlier, and was able to transfer the contradictions in development mentioned above to the outside. So a large number of feudal remnants were preserved, such as cannibalistic capitalism, banning abortion, women's lack of voting rights, child marriage, and so on. In other words, their prosperity was not earned by respecting women. Naturally, the predatory nature of patriarchy or masculism also expands significantly along with the increase in military power. They sought to experience and proclaim their dignity as men of a superior race by engaging in sexual relations with women from other Nerions, including other races, spawning yellow fever and steak theory. Thus, the tragedies of Japanese and Korean women were inevitable. Japan and Korea, with their small territorial size, lack of strategic depth, were unable to engage in prolonged attribution warfare like China. Moreover, they faced overwhelming military disparity against the Western powers' advanced warships and artillery. To protect their own interests, the aristocratic classes quickly capitulated and sacrificed women from the lower and middle classes, forcing them into sexual slavery as comfort women to appease the enemy. The shame of this legacy lingers like a shadow over the men of Japan and South Korea, turned into male rage, branding their women as disgrace and justifying brutal suppression. The behavior of local men provoked extreme backlash from women, which the men seized as an opportunity to vilify women and justify even harsher oppression. To return to the point, why did China miss the first industrial revolution? Let us first examine why the West, or more precisely Europe, became the birthplace of the first industrial revolution. The birthplace of Western civilization, the mountainous Greek peninsula, with its fragmented arable land and obstructed early transportation, gave rise to scattered city-states that proved inhospitable to the emergence of a unified civilization. Naturally, Western civilization inherently lacked the centralized resource coordination capacity of a unified agrarian empire. This structural constraint precipitated maritime trade dependency, which over time crystallized into entrenched mercantile interest groups. Moreover, the constant conflicts between scattered city-states and neighboring regions created sustained pressures on these societies, compelling them to pursue drastic improvements in productive efficiency. This existential imperative ultimately catalyzed the necessity-driven innovation that sparked the first industry revolution. In other words, the very geostrategic conditions that enabled China's unification paradoxically eliminated the existential imperative for productivity breakthroughs that Western civilizations faced. Returning to the metaphor of fish draining the sea, the patriarchal concept of nation and family ultimately revolves around monopolizing ownership of women, the fish, and resource, the water. At its core, it's about controlling fertile water to breed more fish to produce male heirs, ensuring perpetual dominance over both. The logic mirrors operating a fish farm: maximize exploitation to sustain ownership. The family as the foundational unit of the nation functions as a fishbowl, with both constructs following the same patriarchal logic of containment and control. The elite households, controlling the lion's share of resources, create scarcity for the rest. With their vast, lake-like reserves, they coerce women into trading their autonomy for a mere fraction of these waters to secure survival and reproduction. This, in turn, starves other men of access to reproductive resources, imposing severe barriers to genetic continuity. Forced to labor under the elite's yoke for even a sliver of reproductive hope, these men are systematically weakened, while the powerful grow even stronger, monopolizing not just resources, but information itself. This is the foundational logic of how exploiting classes emerge and endure to prevent their breeding resources from slipping away. Men's first instinct is to reinforce the fishbowl. Gatekeeping, veils, headscarves, foot binding, chains, torture, bans on education, from the tangible to the intangible, from bodily mutilation to psychological shackles, no method is left untried. In the case of underdeveloped productivity in the early days, for example, before the first industrial revolution, productive labor is mainly dependent on manpower, equating development for people with producing more people. Resources are prioritized for men, valued as combatants and primary laborers, while women receive the remnants. For patriarchs, women's well-being is irrelevant. Only their reproductive utility and the potential to produce male heirs matter. This logic manifests in the grotesque mother or child dilemma during obstructed labor, where hesitation, or even tacit approval of live cesarean sections, persists. Although modern medical ethics legally mandates prioritizing the mother's life in life-threatening childbirth, the agonizing mother or child dilemma persists to this day, so much so that it remains a perennial trope in television dramas. This reflects a pervasive mindset that reduces women to machinery, their worth measured by output. Saving the mother risks a potential son, while her damaged body may refuse further pregnancies out of trauma. Worse yet, the mother, traumatized by the near-death experience of obstructed labor, may refuse pregnancies altogether, even at the cost of her own survival. Save the baby, but what if it's a girl? Moreover, the mother's death leaves the burden of childcare to the husband's family, complicates remarriage and stunt future reproduction. Crudely put, this mentality epitomizes patriarchal society, a grotesque mirror of the feudal dynamic where the ruler commands death, and the subject dare not disobey, now recast as men's dominion over women's bodies. When such narratives proliferate in popular media, they become tools for social conditioning. For female audiences, the message is clear. A good woman must surrender her life to a man, absorb all blame and sacrifice, and ultimately die for him even because of him, with his genuine tear framed as the ultimate reward. This self-conditioning pervades romance for women literature, epitomized by tropes like chasing the wife to the crematorium, a cannibalistic logic as absurd as making Jiazichui fall in love with Duke Wen of Zhen, who burned him and his mother to force him compliance. For male audiences, it offers not only the emotional payoff of a woman entrusting her life to love, but also reinforces patriarchal self-identity through the implied power to control life via reproduction. Though patriarchal society thrives on contempt for women, this very logic of masculine exclusivity, the insistence that real men must demarcate themselves from the feminine, forms the bedrock of patriarchal identity. Their sense of superiority depends on the subjugation of women. In this sense, patriarchs and male supremacists are paradoxically dependent on women. This contradiction may stem from the biological imperative. Male genetic survival is, after all, materially determined by access to female bodies. It's precisely this deep-rooted objectification, commodification, and enslavement of women that normalizes the Matilda effect, explaining why media erasing women's contributions passes censorship so effortlessly. For patriarchs, women's happiness and careers matter far less than controlling their reproductive utility. To this end, they actively fabricate rumors and scandals, weaponizing social stigma to reinforce the shackles on women. This is precisely why the verdict in the Tanju Fat Cat case incident sparked such widespread outrage. It became a simulacrupture, even inversion, of the patriarchal male sovereign, female subject hierarchy. That's why so many people compare Fat Cat to Chu Yuan, leaving ritual food offerings by the river. Chu Yuan is a royal minister who drowned himself after his ruler deceived by corrupt countries. Many lamented that love no longer exists or wailed the Datong Engaman Trape case dated the sanctity of marriage. Yet these reactions reveal that so-called marriage and love are merely constructs, rules which exist to ensure that men hold the dominant position in terms of profits. The moment they can no longer maintain their position as absolute beneficiaries under these rules, they immediately tear up the system, overturn the table, and shed responsibility, loudly blaming feminism for dating beautiful traditions. Only then may people see the truth. All that sacred rhetoric and beautiful tradition are nothing but useless hypocritical decoration.